Coming up this week on the What's on Your Mind podcast.
I think the worksheet is probably dead. I think essay writing is probably dead. I don't think cheating is a bad thing. Hello and welcome to What's on Your Mind, the podcast where we take 10 minutes to talk about everything nerdy in the world of education, pedagogy and technology. And for sure, we're going to tell you what's on our minds. I'm David Morgan, Head of Learning and Community at Mindjoy, and with me as always is...
Gabi. I'm the CEO of Mindjoy. David, you've been very, very opinionated lately. And I was thinking we should definitely dive into what's been on your mind.
Yeah, I think so. Like one of my spicy articles.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I published a blog post, and we'll link it down below, called The History of Cheating in Schools. And it was entirely inspired by a chat that we were having in the team about in Carter. And I was sort of reminiscing about how I used to cheat my way through homeworks in school by copying, pasting, changing the font and printing it out and getting away with it for a while. And then when the early internet started, it was a game of finding sources your teacher couldn't. But the more I thought about it, the more I thought, well, every point we've had new technology, we've had this freak out about like, oh no, it's ruining schools. Even to the point where calculators, you know, when they were first a thing, people thought that it would be disastrous to the way that mathematics was taught. But I sort of postulating that I don't think cheating on a small scale is a bad thing, because in most cases the assessment methodology was adapted to deal with that, and there's a bunch of sort of extra teaching and learning and pedagogical effects you get from doing things that you know your students are going to be a bit sneaky about.
Yeah, it's so interesting. Like when I think about this, and like when we were speaking about this, one of the things I often just think about is that the students in our classroom today and the students that were in our classroom 10 years ago, their baseline almost is not the same. The knowledge that they come into the space with is not the same. And you and I have both taught coding and computer science, and I think that's maybe one of the most interesting subjects where a lot of folks will be seeing this, where, you know, a lot of tutorials and things, they just weren't so readily available as they are now. And you've made an incredible one at Replit, right? Like the 100 Days of Code with Python. And like those are, it's just such an interesting example, because now all of a sudden, you know, folks who've been teaching computer science as a concrete example, they have students come into the classroom, and all of a sudden they know 60% of the curriculum already, because they've been self-teaching themselves to program for 12 years. And then you've got kids starting at a point where they know nothing. But just that divergence in ability is not the same for every child or every student, where previously you'd maybe start a class, and because most children weren't on the internet, they weren't self-learning and they weren't figuring things out for themselves. Actually, you know, you see this really interesting trait. And now, is that cheating? You know, because they come into the classroom with a different knowledge level. Like they're at a different starting point.
No, absolutely. I think there's always been an element of, if a student was keen and interested in a subject, they were more knowledgeable than their peers. But we've got extremes today, because I think we see this a lot in computer science and coding, because you'll start a class with a bunch of 13-year-olds with a third of the class has never even thought about doing it, and they're excited about getting their hands done. A third of the class have had a little go and a few tutorials online. And some of the class have spent the last 3 years every night, all night, practicing tutorials and can program in Swift in a multitude of different amazing ways, and you're blown away. And as a teacher, that's really difficult to get a handle on all those different ability levels. Right. But I like that. I like the idea. Is that cheating? Is pre-learning cheating? And that's what I said a lot in my article. Actually, like, if you go back to library books and students copying each other's work, which, you know, I did my fair share of back in the pre-internet days. Like library learning wasn't this panacea we think back on it as being, as I turn up to the library and I examine 20 sources and I synthesize the information. No, what it was is we all turned up, took out the same encyclopedia and copied down the same information by hand and gave it to our teacher. You know, copying each other's work is actually much more involved than that, because it's not just copying something down. It is using your brain to synthesize that information in such a way that the teacher doesn't notice you've copied it off your friend. So there's a bunch of actual skills, and like a lot of it is the basis of retrieval practice. It's like pre-learning materials, and like transforming materials, and like there's even some research that suggests that, I suppose we all knew this, but like extreme emotional situations help you encode memories better. So when you are stood in the queue for your class, desperately copying your maths homework down and trying to translate it into your own sort of words and stuff, there's an element that suggests you remember that more than if you'd just done the homework in the first place, which I think is crazy. So yeah, I feel like if you're pre-learning something, it's an actual pedagogical skill, and it might be cheating a little bit, but I think teachers took advantage of that. And I think pre-computers, teachers were much more willing to say, okay, go do this research homework, knowing that they'd copy it down, it passes through the phonological loop once, but when they talk about it in class, there's that pre-learning having been done.
Or going home and mom and dad end up writing the essay or the article and passing it as your own. Now at least mom and dad don't need to write it. Mom and dad probably putting you off to ChatGPT anyway.
Oh well, of course, yeah. The amount of essays that start with as an AI language model, I couldn't possibly do an essay, but must be enormous, circulating in schools at the moment.
I think there's a really interesting thing about copying and pasting and just how we think about that. Because I've always been like quite fascinated by copying and paste. Well, copy paste and just copying. Sorry, I should have started there. Just copy paste is this like interesting idea, like on computers, right? You can copy something and paste it in, like, and where that actually comes from. I think it was like Larry Tesler or something invented the idea of copying paste as like a key shortcut, and the idea actually comes from editing. Fun fact. And the like in the past when we used to print editing and we needed to edit like newspaper being printed, we'd have to take out letters, literally cut out bits of words and then put them paste new strips in if there was a editorial change that needed to happen. And that's actually where the idea of copying and pasting comes from, which was almost this idea of altering and editing. And then, like, to your point, when we're copying things down from other people, like, is that really a bad thing? Is it as bad for our learning as we think it is? Because it's actually a form of like synthesis and figuring things out, or fixing and editing. And then you've got the masters, right? Like master artists and master creators. And when you ask them about their learning process, most of them actually say they copy. They start off by replicating something in its exact form to understand all of its bits, and then they go produce their own. But it's in school we have like default mentality that copying is bad. Copying is just bad rather than it's a means to an end. It's part of a process. So I don't know. I'm not so sold that this like idea that copying is inherently bad.
Well, I'll sort of, yes, I agree, and I think the synthesis is the important part. But I think what like the early computer revolution taught us is that if you copy and paste something without giving it any thought, then you don't actually get any benefit from it. I'll give you an amazing story from my childhood, which is I was always a good kid, top of the class type person, and I used this to my advantage to get away with a lot, honestly. And one of my geography teachers sent me a homework to research wind farms, and I was one of the first like kids with the internet. So I just copied and pasted from about 5 different websites, changed the font formatting, barely read it, printed it out, handed it in. And in the next lesson, I got it handed back, and it was handed back last. Like there was a gap between everyone else getting theirs and me getting mine. And I was, oh God, he's noticed. Well, I'm going to get told off. He gave me an A triple star. And I was like, this doesn't exist. How does this work? And I looked through the paper and he'd highlighted this bit, like 4 pages in, where I'd left in, because I hadn't read it, if you have any questions, please contact the site and the telephone number. And he thought that I'd done amazing research when what I'd really done is just copied and pasted a bunch of stuff. Now today, you'd notice that, wouldn't you? And you'd go, oh, maybe that's not the thing. So like, I mean, we've been in this world of copy pasting being the initial reaction and students not really giving a lot of thought to it for like 15, 20 years. We've had Wikipedia as the central resource for all knowledge and Google to find whatever you wanted. And teachers have adapted to that. And let's be honest, there's 15 years of teacher trainees, of students, like an entire generation has gone through the entire schooling system being able to copy and paste from Google and Wikipedia. And
Yeah.
actually, it's not that bad, is it? It's just that we've adapted the way that we assess things. We don't do research this homeworks anymore because we know we'll end up with a bunch of copied and pasted nonsense. That's where like an essay homework sort of came from, isn't it? It's like, well, write an essay about this. Give me your thoughts on that. Come back in and tell me what you think.
Yeah.
Because that way you at least know the student has passed the copy and pasted knowledge through their brain.
Yeah. I mean, look, I don't think there's anything wrong with sort of like standardized tests in there, like to have a place and a purpose. And I think there's utility in that, like being able to like handle doing an examination under pressure, studying for something, building your base knowledge, all of that's still important. Like, I don't think we're saying that that's not important, right?
Mhm.
But like, I do think it does ask, like, what is a portfolio of work? What do people actually spend their time doing? What motivates, again, and come back to this question of what are young people motivated to do? How do we create take home projects or things where, you know, people want to engage in them because it seems like a meaningful and rich and valuable experience for the development of the self ultimately.
Mhm.
And so, yeah, you know, I think, you know, you're highlighted in this article that you wrote, that we're going to have to change our assessment like practices. So just on that, what are some of the assessment opportunities that you're excited by?
Well, I think like AI in itself has probably broken the vast majority of assessment practices we've got, honestly, and very, very quickly. Like I was, even before ChatGPT, I was showing students how to use OpenAI to generate text and sort of hinting to them, well, I wonder what would happen if you handed this in for your history homework this week. Maybe somebody can find out for me, and seeing what we could get out of it, you know? And now it's much more refined than that.
Mm.
I think a lot of the homeworks that you would set traditionally and spend your time marking are useless. Like I think the worksheet is probably dead. I think essay writing is probably dead if all you're going to do is take it and mark it yourself. Because let's be honest, what are most people? We're getting to a world where we use AI to generate a worksheet. A student uses AI to answer the worksheet, and then we use AI to mark the worksheet.
I know.
So like, who's doing anything? It's a waste of everyone's time. So I feel like there's assessment methodologies that we can bring in that can take advantage and leverage the powers of AI in the classroom. Because, and I always come back to this, honestly, it's like, what have we as a world, as a like in academia, what have we decided is the gold standard for checking somebody understands something?
Mm.
And to my mind, that is, well, what do you do with a PhD? You defend your dissertation, you defend your thesis. You write something down, other knowledgeable people read it, and then they ask you questions and they poke you and they prod you to see if what you've discussed, what you've come up with, what your opinions are valid and defensible. Now, you can recreate that entirely in AI. You can prompt an AI tutor bot to do that argumentative attack on any essay you give a student. So yeah, you can still set the student the write an essay on, but the actual assess part is not you reading it and ticking a bunch of random stuff that the AI has generated. The bit that you assess is the student arguing back in real time to the AI against the points it's making. So if they've established that, you know, they think that, oh, I don't know, like AI is going to be a big win for education long term, then the AI is arguing the opposite and saying, well, justify this point. How do you fight back against that? And that happens in real time as a knowledgeable person, as a knowledgeable entity, I suppose. And the student gets a lot more out of that than just writing an essay and dumping it on your desk, because they have to be able to think critically about arguments they've made and back them up.
And also just answering the question, like if someone questions you, not being upset about it, but actually having the fortitude to answer and think rigorously,
Mhm.
in terms of what's being poked. And I feel like that's almost a meta skill or a soft skill, um, our young people need more of too. You know, like that's not just about, do you like, oh, what do you know, and let me check if you're right or wrong. That's also about, well, why do you think what you think? You know, moving more into informative style of assessments and saying, what do you think? Why do you think that? How do you know that to be true? And these are actually, as we navigate the real world and we navigate consuming media, this is a real world skill we actually all need, right? And we all need to be asking these questions about, what are my sources of information? How do I get it? Why do I believe this? What is my belief system made of? Maybe we don't agree, and that's fine. There's just so much nuance, and that's a skill in of itself. And even in the workplace, right? How do we know if someone's actually understanding and performing well? Well, they're able to interrogate the work they're doing. They're able to strategize. They're able to put forth new ideas. And that's synthesis. That's through debate. That's through interrogating ideas and reconstructing them and ultimately creating new things in the world. And so I think we're going to see assessment needing to mirror, real world things a lot more. And something like project-based learning, right, is a great opportunity for that.
Project-based learning is like, it's part of my soul, I think. Because it like feels so much more like a sense of application. When a student asks you, why am I learning this? You can give them a good reason. Well, we're going to be using it in a project. You're going to be building something that uses this, and this together, and you're going to be trying to achieve this. And they'll go, oh, okay, which is a much better conversation than why am I learning this because it's in the exam and you'll get questions on it. Like that is hard to put that level of engagement into something then when it's just like, for the sake of it stuff. And I used to laugh a lot about for the sake of it learning and for the sake of it work, which is, I suppose, busy work, isn't it? And I feel like a lot of what we've done traditionally in schools is a little bit of for the sake of it. And I think AI, what that unlocks for me is just us as an educational community, just reflecting on why have we assessed in this way? What are the goals? And because we can't keep assessing in the same way, we can find more novel, more interesting, more engaging ways to assess the same things. And I've gone through a bunch in that article. Like, I genuinely believe that things like open book exams are much more effective than closed book exams, because I don't believe we live in a world where I need to force all the information into my head for any length of time. As long as it's long enough for me to be able to do the act, I can look things up and research it. It is the power of transforming that information into actionable things that I can go and do that I think is more important. And so, yeah, I think assessment will have to change. The big question for me, though, is those standardized tests, those formal exams that are set externally. It's like, how does that change? Because in the education community, we've been saying for years, it needs to change. It's a product of the 19th century. We need to change how examinations are done. And I suppose the issue is just the scale and that it's knowledge work. But again, AI feels to me like a possible solution to that problem, because it allows us to scale up knowledge work and augment what a teacher's already doing. So I think that probably in the next 10 years, we'll see big changes from examining bodies and from standardized tests. But that'll be interesting how that all pans out.
Yeah. I'm totally with you on that. And I think for me, there's two things there, which is like, you know, sometimes when we talk with teachers, a lot of the things like, but what the exams are what they are currently. I'm still stuck in the system. That's like, why change because the system hasn't changed yet? And I think that's the wrong, like, no offense. Sorry, I don't think that's wise. I shouldn't say wrong, but I don't know if that's wise, if that's the wise response to have, because I think the change is inevitable. It's just like on what time scale is this going to happen? And folks like examining bodies like the IB, for example, have already decided they're changing. So like you do have progressive examining bodies that are going, look, we're saying AI is in and we're changing the way we assess things. So some organizations are, taking that on quite quickly in the private schooling space. So I think it is just this question of what timetable. But I think the wise approach is also like to capture the opportunities we get in the classroom. One, to accelerate student learning, like because young people can do so much more so quickly. In the same way as when we in work, we can use this technology to help us do things faster in certain ways and create efficiency and even enjoyment, not being stuck on things for so long, just getting instant feedback that unlocks you and helps you move forward. But the other thing that I think would be like wise is for us to actually be human about it and connect with our students on a philosophical level around these questions. Like, why are we doing what we're doing? What is learning actually about? Like, learning is a social phenomena. It's a innately human thing. Maybe not anymore. I don't know. But like, it is part of the human experience at the very least of like figuring out what gives you meaning, what you want to progress at, how you want to develop yourself. And those are meaningful, valuable conversations and experiences for teachers and students to be having together in the classroom. And so I think you don't want to miss that opportunity, like as a teacher in the
Oh
classroom.
no,
That's why you should do it.
absolutely. And I've always said I said this to students, and I said this to teachers. The only thing you have the power to change is how you react to situations and how you deal with things. As a teacher, that means the only thing you can do with the class is change how you're behaving and what you're doing. So
Mm.
you need to adapt and change to support that class. And as students, they need to adapt and change to support where they are and support themselves. But I think we are doing ourselves a disservice as educational practitioners if we ignore the fact that AI is a thing. Even if you blocked it in your school, the students are going home and they're using it to generate their essays. They're using it to answer the questions. They're using it to ideate and just have chats. They are using it. Let's be honest. You, teacher watching this, have probably used it to knock out the 400 reports you've had to do before the summer. You've probably generated the lesson plan for the lesson you wrote bullet points for and had to hand in to a member of senior leadership because they demanded a 14-page lesson plan for you. There's a bunch of things that we already do, but we do it in small silos individually, and we don't really talk about it because we all feel like we're cheating. So the thing for me very much is get AI in your school. Use it with your students openly, use it with the teachers openly, and start having conversations about it, what it's good for, what its disadvantages are. We can leverage it for ideation, where you can have those thought partners that can unstick you and get you working down different routes and getting things done better and getting that feedback. It's such a powerful tool. And if we just bury our heads in the sand and don't look, it's just going to happen to us. And we need to take the reins and do something.
Awesome. I think that's all we have time for today.
I think so. I think so. I talked a lot then. I'm sorry. These are supposed to be
I
10
know,
minutes, by the way.
James, I love your how your brain works. This is not an AI version of you, is it?
I've said before, I feel like we are like educational soulmates. Like we feel the same about a lot of things. So I think that works. Don't worry.
Yeah, I
Well,
mean,
thank you very much for
it's
tuning
so
in.
funny.
Sorry, go.
It's so funny. When sometimes I like whenever you're on Slack, like someone says something, I'm like, oh, like let me go give my teachery perspective on this. You know, if it was something coming from engineering, and then I like jump in, and David's already there giving comments, and I'm just like +1, +1, +1, new thought.
Making your life easier. That's my job. Well, thank you very much everyone for tuning in. We hope to see you next time where we'll talk about the nerdiest things in the world of education, pedagogy, and technology. We're Team Mindjoy. We think we do a great job of bringing AI to schools, but don't take our word for it. Go to mindjoy.com, sign up for a 14-day free trial, and do push it out to your students because playing with it yourself is not how you find out what the impact in the classroom is really going to be. So please do go and do it for yourself. I've been David Morgan.
And I'm Gabi.
And we'll see you next time. Don't forget to reach out to us on LinkedIn or X, formerly Twitter, if you've got any comments and to tell us what's on your mind.